Coming up on One Detroit, the kids head back to school, and we take a closer look at education in Michigan. Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson hash out how we fund our schools. Then an in-depth report from Bridge Magazine on the growing reliance on long-term subs in the classroom. We'll also talk about the new high school opening in Detroit and talk expectations for the district. And then spend some time with this teacher as she shares learning strategies for her bilingual class. I'm Christy McDonald. Stay with me. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and by
Business Leaders for Michigan has 5 priorities to make Michigan a top 10 state. Achieve a balanced budget, cut long-term debt, fix our roads, improve all levels of education, further economic growth, plan for a stronger Michigan. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
Also brought to you by Ally, Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. The kids are heading back to school, and how we educate our kids in Michigan, how they achieve and how we pay for it is one of the most critical issues our state is facing in 2019. There's new leadership at the state superintendent's office. The 3rd grade reading law goes into effect this year, plus the legislature is still wrestling with how to fund schools. Nolan and Stephen join me to take a look at the biggest concerns. Plus an in-depth report from Bridge Magazine on the chronic use of long-term substitutes around the state instead of full-time teachers in the classroom. The numbers are startling. And then we'll take you to the new high school in Detroit at Marygrove and hear why it's different from other schools in the district. That is all coming up. But we are going to start off with our One Detroit contributors. Say hello to Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal. Hey guys, the kids are back in school and there's cheers everywhere.
It's
from
the most wonderful time.
It is. They need to be back in school. And some kids started earlier. I know in my district they started before Labor Day, and a lot more school districts are doing that around the state.
We need to adopt a year-round model, and I know that, the tourism industry pushes back on that a lot, but too much knowledge falls out of these kids' heads.
I actually go back and forth about the year-round school thing. I am a little bit of a purist and believe that summer time off matters. We all had it for 3 months every year.
It's okay for them to learn how to be bored too, if they're not enriching their minds at all times. But that's just a small part of what we're talking about when we're talking about education in Michigan, specifically looking at funding right now. School districts don't know what they're going to be having to use with because the budget isn't done yet. And we're also looking at what are our achievement numbers going to be this year, because Michigan has significantly fallen behind in the last 10 years.
And we've made no substantive changes to address that. We keep tinkering around the edges and this new program and that new program. We need to radically reform the way we educate kids in Michigan. And you mentioned the Marygrove school. I mean, that's the sort of thing we need to be willing to do instead of trying to apply a broad-based model over every kid across the state. Let's allow for experimentation in the schools, individualized learning programs for children. Let's acknowledge the fact that children today are different than they were 40 years ago, so you can't simply line them up in front of a teacher and try to pound information into them. Project-based learning. There's a lot of things out there that other states and other places are trying that we are reluctant to experiment with.
But with that kind of change or that kind of innovation and experimentation, does that take different kind of funding? And should that be something that we are looking at in Michigan about maybe changing the way that we fund our schools?
So I mean, I say this a lot, and I say it a lot on the show. There are models out there that we should be emulating, and they're not ambiguous. I mean, it's not an argument about who is doing it the best. Massachusetts, Maryland, they lead the nation each year in outcomes and achievement. And if you look at the way they fund schools, if you look at the way they govern schools, if you look at the way they hold schools accountable, if you look at the way they manage innovation, those are the pathways to duplicating what they do. We don't do anything that they do in those states here in Michigan.
Would you say that it's not as political in those states, that there is a more of an above-board push from the business community, or saying this is not going to change each year with the legislature, it's going to be a constant?
That's certainly the case in Tennessee and Colorado. I don't know about Massachusetts and Maryland, but we keep trying to go at this from the money end. Give us more money. I think if you've got to convince people you've got to convince people that you're going to do something with that money. And the other things Steve are talking about, we never put those together when we go. We've not done an overall education strategy in this state. Governor Snyder had the 21st Century Education Commission. How many of those initiatives were put in place?
I don't think very many.
Because we won't break down the major obstacle to reforming education in Michigan, and that's getting rid of the elected school board and Department of Education, folded it under an accountable governor who can shape a vision and bring people on board to do the things those states are doing, you're talking about.
Well, we now do have a new state superintendent who's taking on the role. We also have something big this year that a lot of parents are looking for, is that third grade retention reading law, that if kids aren't at a certain benchmark, they could be held back, and you could have thousands of kids that fall into that category, and then it's where is the catch-all for these districts to be able to then give them the help that they need to achieve that.
Yeah, well, so I mean, it's one of the most asinine pieces of legislation I think ever considered, let alone passed. As a practical matter, it could never work. You could never do what they are asking school districts to do, which is to hold kids back on that scale. But the other reason it makes no sense is that it ignores practice. The simplest way to make sure that kids read at level by third grade is to make sure that there's a reading specialist in every classroom in the first 3 grades, kindergarten, first, and second. When you do that, and there are places in Detroit schools where you can find that they are trying that. There are places in schools all over the state where they're trying that. When you do that, you almost never come up with this issue that kids by third grade are still trying to learn to read.
But
we won't do that.
That's specialized help, and that does take some of the funding.
You gotta pay for it.
It does, or you can do things differently. I mean, John Engler, and I'll credit him with this idea because I think it's a good one, said the first 3 years of education should be about nothing but reading, because you can't teach anything else until the kids can read.
The curriculum already reflects that, actually.
Well, you don't have that sort of immersed reading program those first 3 years. If you did, you wouldn't have so many third graders who can't read. And we know in Detroit we have this Beyond Basics program that has proven itself able to bring a kid to grade level reading any age, bring the kid to grade level reading by 6th grade. It's a
with
30
reading specialists. That's how they
with
how
individualized tutor, not one for each classroom, one for each kid.
For each kid.
And it's expensive.
And that takes money. So how much money they're trying to raise?
It's $30 million, but you look at what Detroit spends on all these other programs that aren't working. Why not devote that money to this reading program that they've proven their success?
Yeah.
We don't do the things we know will work.
It's going to be actually a very interesting year when it comes to education. You know, stay with me. We're going to come back in just a few minutes here. But I'd like to turn now to a series of eye-opening reports in Bridge Magazine on the number of long-term substitute teachers that are in classrooms across Michigan. More districts are relying on subs to fill teacher vacancies. In some districts, long-term subs make up half of the teaching positions. And that is a practice that is on the rise in K-12. I caught up with reporter Mike Wilkinson, who worked on this investigation. What even made you look into the numbers for long-term subs across Michigan?
Well, one of my colleagues, Ron French, who covers education for Bridge, he had covered the Benton Harbor situation where the state was considering taking over the school for poor performance and in their inability to pay. And one of the things he found out was that last year, over 40% of their teachers were long-term substitutes, that they could not find fully certified teachers to take positions. And in finding that out, they said, well, what's it going to be next year? And they said, well, so the current year is going to be 60%. And so I reached out to the Office of Educator Excellence, and I said, do you have this data? And they said, yeah. And so they gave it to us, and I realized that, for the 4 years preceding 3 years ago, it was like 200 long-term subs statewide.
Statewide.
Had a permit. And that's covering, you know, your teacher who goes on maternity leave, someone who has a medical leave, you know, they're dealing with a family issue or a health issue. And then real quickly in the last 3 years, it went to 2,500. So you have, now there's nearly 100,000 teachers in the state, but still that kind of a quick tenfold increase made us realize that there was an issue. And beyond that, it's just where they were. They were in the schools typically where the students were already low performing. They were in schools where the districts were cash poor, like a Benton Harbor. And then we found that, you know, over half of them were in the charter schools, and charter schools only educate 10% of the students in the state. So we realized there was a little bit of an imbalance there, and so that's why we kind of dove into the topic.
So when you look at the numbers and you look at how it's increased in the last several years, why is this happening?
Well, everyone talks about that there's a teacher shortage in Michigan, that there's not enough teachers with the proper credentials to fill all the classrooms. You know, there's some debate about that. I mean, there are a lot of teachers who are just on the sidelines. They've taken other jobs. The economy has improved. You can make a whole lot of money now with those kind of skills. Someone who can manage a classroom, who can educate. I mean, a lot of employers would really like to have these people. So you have a situation where they're having other opportunities beyond the class, and some are just not wanting to do a job that has had pay freezes, has had benefit declines. There's, you know, the respect for the teacher in the classroom has declined. It's not the attractive job that I think a lot of people thought it was 30 years ago when I was in school, where you got out of college, you went into the classroom, you taught for 30 years, you retired at 55, and you had, you know, had this great life. Those kind of all have combined to diminish the pool of teachers. And then those schools that we saw the largest increase in subs were the ones who are probably paying the less. Benton Harbor, which doesn't have the resources. The charter schools, you know, we talked to a teacher who made 32 in the charter schools. He switched to another school and made 40.
And that's a significant difference for people.
You know, $700 a month, if that's my math real quick, is real money. I mean, I don't think anyone would, that's someone's rent payment. You know, in Detroit, which did have a problem, locally here in Metro Detroit, you know, Nikolai Vitti, when he comes in as superintendent, he realized there's a big problem with pay. They've had freezes. They were not increasing people, and so he's worked with the teachers to restructure the contract. And one big component is they created a pool where if you come into the district, you can get a $3,000 hiring bonus. It helped Detroit, but I think it caused a lot of the charters in the area to kind of scramble. So then they had to reach out to people who just maybe had a bachelor's degree and an interest in math or an interest in Spanish to lead classrooms. So they didn't necessarily have the proper training in classroom management and teaching.
All right, so we have this change, and we know that there are more long-term subs in the classroom that we've seen before in the state of Michigan. What is the impact now that we're seeing on students and their achievement when they have this kind of transience, really, and not the stability of having that same person in front of the class?
Well, the test results, the rise has been so quick, you couldn't say because this happened. It's just not enough time to really, you know, dive into those numbers. You know, but anecdotally, talking to 4 students who had a lot of long-term subs, and you know, what we found was, I mean, they would lose interest in their class because the teacher didn't have control of the class. So there was a lot of talking, there was a lot of discipline issues, and then once they lost control, then they'd leave. Then there's another sub. And I talked to one gentleman at a charter academy on the near west side of Detroit, who his chemistry teacher, you know, might have known chemistry, but he couldn't teach it. And so every day he had to go home and teach it himself on YouTube. He found a lesson and he did it, and he said, you know, everyone in his class who wanted to pass that class had to go to the extraordinary effort of teaching themselves it using YouTube. And as he said, everything's on YouTube, and apparently even chemistry is. And you don't want to have to drive the kids, though, after they've been in the classroom, or to say you've got to have it in you to be motivated enough to find that. So what has the reaction been to the story and seeing a lot of the data points here? And because there's no legislation that says you can only have X amount of long-term subs in a district, they can really pretty much do whatever they have to do to plug a hole. Well, you know, we ran the story while the state is still talking about the budget. They have not come up with an education budget. You know, any solutions would probably require more money. You know, a lot of Democratic legislators were outraged. You know, they couldn't believe that this was happening. The State Department of Education was fairly defensive and said, you know, we allow it, and this is where we are. They did not criticize it. So I think the solutions are going to have to come, from the legislature. It's going to involve money. But one thing I wanted to mention was, you're not seeing these teachers in a district like an Okemos or a Troy or Utica where I grew up. You're not seeing them in Birmingham. They have the money to make sure those people are covered. It's only in districts, for the most part, where with lesser resources. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think those are the kids who need the best teachers.
And would benefit most from having that continuity.
Mm-hmm.
This week, close to 120 ninth graders started at a new Detroit Public Schools high school called the School at Marygrove. It focuses on engineering and social justice, and it is a partnership with the University of Michigan School of Education as they look to refine teacher training. Students have to pass an exam to get in, and so far half the freshman class are Detroiters who aren't currently at Detroit Public Schools, which is a big deal.
What makes us especially proud about this class is that more than 90% of students in the first class are Detroiters. So they're from the city, and not only that, but over 60% of the students in the first class are within the 2-mile radius of Marygrove. So our vision is to create a neighborhood school here, starting with the 9th grade. From this year, we'll add a 10th grade, then an 11th, and a 12th. And then with partnership with Kresge, the Early Learning Center will start with Starfish, with our pre-K students, and eventually they will matriculate into first grade or kindergarten, and then we'll have a full K-12 school here at Marygrove. It's already exciting to be on the campus and just see high school students here, but imagine what this will look like in the years to come, to have a K-12 and even a K-20 continuum with the University of Michigan. Who's also a proud sponsor and supporter and partner of this program. So you see 7 teachers here. You also saw 3 intern teachers. These are 3 undergraduate students that are learning how to teach. You also have a resident. One of the 7 teachers here is a resident, which means that she's already completed her undergraduate work and she's learning how to be a teacher. So part of the vision of Marygrove is not only to have this K-20 continuum, but it's also to create a pipeline of teachers into the future, not only for Marygrove, but DPSCD across the board. Also excited to say on the first day of school, we only have 75 vacancies, teacher vacancies. When we started this work only a couple of years ago, we had 275. In addition to that, we've hired thousands of new teachers for music, art, PE, master teachers, full-time security, full-time deans, more assistant principals. So our vacancy rate is lower, much lower than it was before. We are anticipating another increase in enrollment. This is the first time that this has happened in DPSCD in over 10 years. So all things are positive. In addition to Marygrove, we have another set of new schools that we're offering this year as well. Those schools are ready to go on the first day. And we're excited about expanding the portfolio of DPSCD schools as well, not just where we are, but where we're headed into the future.
So when you look at a school like this, and really what DPSCD is trying to do is get more kids back enrolled in the district and to give them a different kind of opportunity. You've been able to tour through the school. Stephen, what are your thoughts on how this is going to be a game changer at the high school level for
So this
Detroit?
is what Vitti said he wanted to do when he came here. He said instead of complaining about charter schools and suburban districts taking kids from Detroit, we need to create options that those kids want, that they will come back into the city for. And so the enthusiasm about this school, I think, reflects how right he was about that, and that if you create those options, they will come here. I think this school has a lot of challenges in front of it, right? There's a lot riding on their performance, and especially early on, it is really difficult to start from scratch the way they are, creating a school and to get the outcomes that they want. But Elizabeth Moji, who's the dean of the School of Ed in Ann Arbor, has had her hands like absolutely gripped around this thing from the beginning, and she's somebody who I think really does understand how schools should be built and run, and I expect that this school will reflect that. So I'm optimistic about what we'll see.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this is also looking at it from a teacher training aspect and making sure that the teachers who are in the classroom, they have repeated backup, they have support, they have that master teacher that's able to come in and help them either troubleshoot some of the things that they're working on, and so that there's some continuity of what's happening in the classrooms as well, which is a huge deal that sometimes we don't even get to when we have the debate about funding and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, former superintendent, Mike Flanagan, always talked about starting this process in the teacher schools in Michigan and making sure they're all producing the product they need or we need in our classrooms, and it's not always happening. You know, we've got to pay a lot more attention about what goes on in that classroom. Instead of just handing out rules, handing out new programs, new tests, we got to pay attention to what's going on between the teachers and the students.
All right, and we will see from there. You know, and finally, teachers do have a lot of challenges on the job. They have to learn to work with each child and meet them where they are. So let's head into a class at the Academy of the Americas, and that's a Detroit Public School on Detroit's southwest side. You'll see what Ms. Sosa does to engage her bilingual kids as part of Detroit Public TV's Early Education Teach and Tell initiative.
Look at the farmer, he's planting the seeds. ¿Lo leíste? ¿Y qué le pasó cuando se comió el caballo?
I teach at the Academy of the Americas School. It's a dual language immersion school in southwest Detroit. We see it as an asset when we have children who speak both languages, English and Spanish. In our case, our English dominant children start to learn Spanish. Our Spanish dominant children learn to speak English. So it's a win-win situation for both groups.
Corriendo alrededor del alfabeto. We're marching around the alphabet. Where we stop, nobody knows until the whistle blows.
At the beginning of the year, of course, it is hard. Everyone is talking at the same time, and so we just remind them kindly and gently that I can't hear everyone, and everyone's ideas are so important that I want to make sure that I hear everyone. So then I do say, just a minute, let me hear what so-and-so is saying to me, and I want to listen to your idea as well. And so I make sure that I do go back then and ask them, tell me what you want. You were so excited. Tell me about what you wanted to share. So I think after practicing that, they get it.
Pink Stitch, okay? Does Pink Stitch have a body?
Well, I think it's important for the kids not to feel like someone is looking down at them, but rather we're looking one-on-one with each other. We're making eye contact. I think that makes them feel more comfortable, a bit more safer, that it's not someone towering over them. So I make it a point to always be at their eye level.
Oh, no te escuché. V.
Oh, they have grown tremendously. I see them more confident. I see them making friends. Many of them are writing now. They're writing their names, where a few of them just scribbled. Now they're writing letters. They're writing for a purpose. Many couldn't count past 5. They're all counting past 10.
20, 21.
So we're just making it a natural part of the day.
Do you remember where Yasmin is at? She's at Mexico.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And that is going to do it for One Detroit. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you come back next Thursday. And until then, check us out at DetroitPBS.org. I'm Christy McDonald. We will see you then.